So after the success of Saints Row III, and giving the series a second chance of popularity by pushing the bounds of self-parody and satirizing the GTA formula, and all the while still being a fun and fulfilling experience. So it was only a matter of time before another sequel happened. If anything out of any sequel, Saints Row 4 was pretty much a guarantee. So the question was, well, how were the team gonna outdo themselves this time? They were so bombastic in 3 that it honestly felt like they couldn't do much more in terms of that style of gameplay. Well, maybe this time around they'll just focus on polishing up the game, making it look better and add some new activities. Well, to an extent they did so for the activities, but I seriously doubt anyone would have saw this coming. Yet it made too much sense not to do it. Turn the GTA clone into an Infamous clone. You'd think that's a disaster just waiting to happen, but quite frankly, it's amazing how well they pulled this transition off. So after their antics in Steelport City, and basically taking it over much like they did Stillwater, the 3rd Street Saints have not only become cultural icons and superstars, but it seems the government have decided to hire them for recon missions. I guess if you can't beat them, hire them. So the Saints are sent on a mission to stop terrorists from launching a nuclear missile that could wipe out the entire Earth. And the boss manages to do just that, which makes the people view him as a hero. And not long after, the boss goes on to become president of the United States, making the Saints not only one of the strongest gangs, but one of the strongest powers in the world. This would go on to be short-lived though, since planet Earth would be invaded by an alien race commanded by the warlord Zinyak. Despite the boss's best efforts to repel the alien attack, they are overpowered pretty quickly and the boss and his or her entire cabinet is abducted. Sometime after though, the boss wakes up in Pleasantville, living a carefree life until she realizes that things are a little too peaceful and a little too 1950s. With the help of Kinsey, they're able to create enough chaos to make the 1950s simulation fall apart. But Zinyak has other plans. As basically the god of these simulated worlds, he can control what happens, and in an attempt to break the Saints and make them submit to the alien race, he throws the boss into a simulated version of Steelport. But unlike the real Steelport, there's no trace of the Saints' influence whatsoever. But of course, in good old Saints fashion, that doesn't stop the boss from running amok and causing chaos, doing whatever possible and finding his or her way out of the simulation to save the captured Saints from Zinyak's forces. Not too long into the simulation, the boss and Kinsey stumble upon these clusters and figure out that they can harness the power of them to allow the boss to become super powerful, and use superpowers such as high speeds and high jumps, the start of what the boss can attain. So as you can see, Saints Row 4 went full on sci-fi, parodying elements of Independence Day, The Matrix, there's a whole section of the game that's a spoof on the Mass Effect series, and as seen in the opening, even 50s sitcoms. Saints Row 3 might have cranked up that dial to 11 on its absurdity and its plot and what you could do, but this game just decides to double down on that thought process, and to me, they outdid themselves big time. The story and main missions might be ridiculous, hell, some may even say childish at points, but I think anyone who's a fan of, say, South Park will probably enjoy this game's setup. Whether it's escaping the mothership naked, to Zinyak's Tim Curry-like voice and campy, pompous attitude, there's a lot of heart and charm to it. Unlike, say, South Park where they're always just trying to push the envelope in terms of shock value, Saints Row 4 on the other hand might be heavily satirical, some may even consider it obnoxious just how far they might go. But the difference is, Saints Row never feels mean-spirited or like they're trying to be shocking or edgy. Anything it's parodying or making fun of, much like the 3rd, they're doing it out of appreciation, love, and respect for those series. And to me, it makes this game much more enjoyable because of it. So in terms of gameplay, a lot of what Saints Row 3 did was brought back mostly the same. You still had the robust character creator that's pretty much one from last time. There's a couple things added like a 7th voice and the ability to change the pitch of these voices, but it's about the same as last time. This goes for the clothing options too. Majority of the clothes do make a return alongside a batch of new stuff to check out. And just like last time, you can customize each piece of clothing too. Again, near limitless possibilities. But other than that, 1-to-1 like I said. In fact, it's pretty apparent right away that this is essentially the same engine as last time. Graphically, it's the same models and the same city. I can see this aspect turning off some players, as you'd think a sequel would try to make these kind of improvements, even if it's minor, a much bigger deal. And they would have a point. But for me personally, I've never been much of a graphics whore, so it didn't bother me too much. In fact, I kind of like the familiarity. The cool thing about this copy and paste was that on the PS3 version, they would allow you to port over your character from the 3rd game if you had one, which was a nice feature. It makes both games feel linked and like your character's more canon, almost like there's an attachment, if that makes sense. What is a bit of a bummer though, and I personally think is the game's biggest pitfall, is the fact that they reused Steelport as the map again. Sure, there are some changes, and visually it's a drastic change with the sci-fi objects placed in the cool nighttime sunset vibe, but still, this is 90% of the same city that you roamed around in last time. And while you're clearly exploring it in a different way, it does make this game feel a bit cheaper. If it wasn't for a good chunk of the story missions changing up their locations, this would have been an even bigger knock against the game. So when you're in a simulated Steelport, it's pretty much the same doing business as usual. You'll explore and partake in activities and events, all in an attempt to take control over the city, and as you do so, you'll once again level up and earn money to buy weapons and upgrade yourself. If you watch my Saints Row 3 episode, then you already know how I feel about making the events and activities the main focus of the gameplay, so I won't go into it again. I'll just say once again, it's addictive just running around leveling up and earning cash from the absurd amount of stuff you can do in this game. Thankfully, in this department, this hasn't been another one-to-one copy and paste, as there has been some refinements to make it even more fulfilling to complete. First off, the activities. To fit in with the new theming, there are new ones like UFO mayhem missions, or even just normal mayhem where now it usually involves a specific and wacky gun to use. But that's not to say it's all different. Some of the best ideas do make a return, such as those Genki missions, which were some of the best activities last time. But also, my favorite being the insurance fraud missions also make a return here. And holy hell, they are even more fun than ever before. Admittedly, while being my favorite, they were definitely some of the hardest missions in the game last time. This time around, they not only made them more ridiculous and fun to play, but also somehow made them the easiest. Like, look what I'm able to pull off here. You are lucky if you could even get a quarter of those heights. Now, if you know what you're doing, you can go from one end of the city to the other. It's absurd, but I fucking love it. The main change up to these activities this time is that now you are ranked on how well you do, with gold being the best performance. And this becomes a major change up when it comes to the side stuff, because the challenges also make a return, but unlike last time where they were pretty optional outside of some extra cash, here they are much more important since not only do they give you more cash and experience points, but they are also now a way of unlocking some of the skills and power-ups. And as you probably guessed, a good chunk of those challenges require the gold ranks. So yeah, while it might feel a bit samey when it comes to side content when compared to the third game, to me it's done better in 4 because more than ever, there's better incentives to go out of your way to do them. Also, majority of the stuff you do is pretty seamless now. Before, if you wanted to start an event or activity, you usually had to wait for a loading screen first, which isn't the case anymore. Unless it's something specific where it has to load something in, these activities and events start instantly. It might be a little thing, but you know me, the little things go a long way. But of course, the biggest change up the gameplay is the introduction of being able to use superpowers Infamous style. And it's shocking how well they managed to not only make it work, but also being such a game changer while at the same time feeling extremely familiar to what came before. The boss will only start out with super speed and being able to jump high, but as time goes on you'll unlock the ability to glide and run up walls as well as water, plus a bunch of offensive abilities, all the while still using your normal moves and guns. The catch is though, you're only able to use them when you're in the simulator. If you're doing a mission outside of it, well, you're shit out of luck and you're playing as the base boss. It's an interesting concept that makes both worlds feel very distinct. But for the most part, you'll be spending the majority of your time in fake Steelport with your gradually growing powers, which can be expanded on by leveling up. But instead of money to use as upgrades, you use those data clusters as I mentioned earlier. This game's version of the blast shards in Infamous. Even after all these years, it still amazes me how the team managed to incorporate such a drastic new playstyle, all the while retaining all the mechanics in the previous game, and not making what you could do in the other games feel any lesser. Well, except for one thing. That being the vehicles. The first two powers you get right away are, like I said, super speed and being able to jump high. Well, this quickly makes most vehicles completely useless outside of one type of specific activity. Sure, you can still enter vehicles and drive around, but kind of pointless when you run faster than cars now, and it's just more feasible to run and jump, exploring and seeing what you can find. And hell, you'll have your hands full with the clusters alone. Though one little side thing before I move on to clusters, because the lack of use of vehicles did lead to one of the best additions in my opinion. So in most games like this, whenever you're driving, you can turn on the radio to listen to music, always a feature I enjoyed. Well, thankfully the team had enough foresight to let you listen to the radio or mixtape whenever you wanted, and quite frankly a feature every game like this should have, because the rest of the time it was limited strictly to when you were in a vehicle. Well, now that you rarely use them, the music would have been a waste, since you would have never listened to it otherwise. But due to this change up, whether you're driving, running up the side of the wall, or going on a killing spree, you got music playing while you do so. And for someone like me who likes to turn the background music off in other games and have my songs playing instead, hell, I even used to do that with AV cables back in the day. It might be a little thing, but it makes all the difference because music is a big thing for me, and nothing is more relaxing than playing a game and being able to listen to my favorite songs while doing so. Which thankfully this game has a good selection of too, so even when I don't have access to my music, the game still has me covered. So I don't know, I just felt this feature was important enough to mention, but back to the clusters. In Infamous, there's usually about maybe 300 or total soul blast shards in each game. Here, they are fucking everywhere. I mean, look at how many I had built up just from finding the ones you could get right away, and that was after about spending 250 of them. The change up though is some of these clusters can only be collected by using certain powers, making these MacGuffins a bit more interesting. Now, some may feel the amount is incredibly excessive. I think there's about 1,000 in total, and I would probably agree if this was Infamous. In those games when it comes to powers, it's a bit of a slow burn with what you get. You might be a powerful conduit, but but you only start out with the basic stuff at first. And definitely don't start out with any major mobility perks. Saints Row 4, on the other hand, goes the complete opposite, making the boss's mobility first priority, and in my opinion is a much better choice. Sure, the Infamous series may have the more realistic approach and interesting powers, but to me, Saints Row, while it may lack in originality, more than makes up for it in a practical sense. It does everything it can to make the player feel extremely powerful and feel like you can do and go anywhere. So really, the excessive amount of clusters is kind of a pro actually. Since it's so easy to get from point A to point B, it becomes kind of addicting going after them and collecting a bunch, knowing that your powers will get stronger as you do so. I think the best part about such a major inclusion with the superpowers is that while yeah, it definitely changes things up big time, but outside of the vehicles, it doesn't feel like it's overshadowing anything. It just complements what you can already do. You still use guns, you can still go on rampages, headshotting, nut punching, and blowing shit up. Just now you can do earthquake stomps, grab and fling objects and people telepathically, or throw energy orbs at different elements. I know I sound like a broken record here, but I can't stress enough just how well Volition nailed these new mechanics and yet still feel like a GTA clone. That couldn't have been easy, but they still managed to make it work without it feeling completely unbalanced or broken. So as you can tell, I love this game. In my opinion, I think it's the best in the series so far, and if you're into GTA or even Infamous, then I highly recommend you play this game. But, and that is a big but, only play Saints Row 4 after you've played and done everything you want to do in Saints Row the 3rd. Cause I forgot just how hard it is to go back to the 3rd game after playing this one. Not because the 3rd game is crap in comparison. Oh no, the 3rd game is a really great game in my opinion. But it's just the simple fact that once you experience even the super speed, the boss just feels so basic in comparison. It feels like you're missing a part of the game otherwise. And that's not the 3rd's fault. If anything, I recommend playing 3 and 4 back to back and just treat them as one big game, with Saints Row 4 being the second half. Due to how similar the two copy and paste from each other in a lot of ways, you could come to that conclusion. I know whenever I come back to these games, I play these two back to back, and to me there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I'd encourage it. Now, could some argue that it makes Saints Row 4 feel lesser as a sequel? Well, I'm sure you can make the argument, but hey, Saints Row at the end of the day is all about having fun and screwing around in this world, taking whatever limits it wants to the max. That's just the focus of it, and I'm sure it'll always be too. So on a technical level, it might not be impressive, but in terms of its core values to its gameplay, it's the perfect sequel and a great complement to Saints Row the 3rd. Definitely play these games if you're into this kind of stuff. You won't regret it, I promise.